First of the Inclusion Australia Everyone Can Work workshops. My name is Catherine McAlpine. Evan, could we have the next slide? So my name is Catherine McAlpine and I'm presenting the webinar today. So to start with, I'd just like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land I am joining you from today, and the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia on which we are all meeting. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and community, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and particularly welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people attending the workshop today. This is a 1 hour workshop, so there's not a lot of time, and we do want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask questions. So certainly we will work to make that happen. Handouts, hopefully you all have some handouts. Some handouts were sent to all of the webinar attendees' email addresses, along with a pre-workshop survey. And we'd very much appreciate it if you had the time to quickly fill out the survey, because it really lets us know what things are helpful and what things are not. So we're using, this is a Zoom meeting today, so just wanted to say that it would be good if everyone's microphones could be on mute. You can see on the screen there is an image of a microphone with a slash through it. That lets you know that your microphone is on mute. If the microphone sign is showing, then you can be heard in the meeting. You can choose whether you want to use your webcam or not. If we don't see you, usually your name will come up. And certainly would invite you, if you are asking questions out loud, to turn on your video at that time so that I can see you when we're talking to you. My colleague Katie, you might have seen, has just put some stuff in the chat. She's providing the webinar tech support today. So certainly if you've got any problems, please communicate via the chat function. So we're hoping to use the chat facility for you to make comments or ask questions. I'll keep an eye on it as we go, and I'll try and answer your questions throughout the presentation, but we'll try and have a couple of spots for questions along the way as well. As I mentioned, we sent the handouts and a pre-training survey for the training in your email, and Katie has put those now in the chat box in case you didn't receive them or you registered quite late. If you're having technical problems, like you can't hear me very well, please type this into the chat and we will do what we can to sort out problems from our end. And finally, I wanted to let you all know that we are recording this session today, that this has been advertised, that we will put this webinar up on our website. And so I wanted to let you know that we are going to start the recording now. And if your screen is like mine, you should have had a red light now appear in the top left-hand corner of your screen, and that indicates that this session is now recording. Please let us know in the chat if this is a problem for you, or otherwise maybe you might choose to leave, that's fine. So today's webinar. Today's webinar is particularly for families who have school-age children with an intellectual disability. You might think that getting a job is a long way off, but really there's some things that might be good for you to know right now when you're starting to think about your child getting a job. So the things that we're going to talk about today are open employment, why it's important, how families can help, and the supports you can access. We're going to look at our brand new Everyone Can Work website, and we have a guest speaker to talk a bit about their open employment experience. The Everyone Can Work website and webinars were developed by Inclusion Australia, and we are the national organisation that represents people with intellectual disability and their families. The project is funded by an NDIS ILC grant. I'm guessing that quite a few of you online already know what that means, but ILC stands for Information, Linkages and Capacity Building. and aims to create inclusive communities. And having a job in open employment is one of the most important and best ways to help people with intellectual disability to be truly included in our community. We'll be having another 3 workshops after this for people at different ages and stages. They're all designed to help people with intellectual disability have success in open employment. And certainly if you've got a child who's in high school right now, you might also like to register for the transition planning at school webinar, which might also be of particular relevance to you. So the first thing we thought we'd do is just a very quick icebreaker activity. It's very hard to find icebreakers activities for online webinars where it feels a bit like I'm speaking into the void. And so what we thought we'd do to start with is just to get people used to using the chat function, is to ask you why you decided to come to this webinar. Is to just have a, in order to give me a little bit of insight and some examples of why you might have joined the webinar and what it is that you're particularly interested in, it would be great if you could type into the chat right now why you're here, what you're hoping to get out of it, any key questions that you're hoping that we might answer. So I'm just going to wait a second and hope that someone uses the chat. So I've got one item there to learn of student options for post-school. And we won't go through all of those today, but we will go through them in some of these in more detail. But certainly we will talk about this late in the webinar today. If you've got a 17-year-old child who's doing VCAL and want to find out as much as you can do to assist him, certainly some of the stuff we talk about today will be helpful, but I'd really encourage you to go to the transitions workshop as well, where we'll talk about some of those things in a little bit more detail. Helping children make choices about what you want to do post-school, isn't that a challenge for all of us? In terms of how much I've actually got a son who's in year 12 this year, so it's been a terrible year in terms of of course, in terms of COVID and the lockdowns. I live in Victoria. As I said, I'm coming to you from Wurundjeri land, and the number, he feels very secure. He wants to do an apprenticeship next year, but so many of his friends really don't know. And you add the complexity of intellectual disability on top of that, it's very hard to work out. I completely agree with the parent of the 10-year-old. This is a great time to start talking, and this workshop is pitched directly for you. So I hope you find it helpful. So please let us know afterwards. Oh, that's great. That's great. That sort of feedback. Thank you very much for participating in that. Really appreciate the feedback, and it really gives us an idea of what it is that you want to know so that all of our workshops can be as helpful as possible. So to start with, I'm just going to talk a little bit about employment pathways. And the reasons that sometimes these pathways can be really limited for people with intellectual disability. I just wanted to mention, of course, because we're Inclusion Australia, we're looking at all of these things through the lens of intellectual disability and for looking at things specifically relevant to people with intellectual disability. We're very proud to have that focus, and so because that's who we are and that's what we do. But of course, a lot of what we say will be very useful for some people with other disabilities as well. I would just say to you that we haven't on our website necessarily covered everything about everything. So for example, when we talk about the disability support pension, we don't necessarily talk about some other complexities that people with intellectual disability are unlikely to have to deal with. So that's just letting you know a bit about the limits of what we do. But certainly for people with intellectual disability, we find that employment pathways are limited because of low expectations, inadequate support, confusing information, and worries about the disability support pension. Very often young people with intellectual disability go straight from high school into an Australian disability enterprise, the old-fashioned sheltered workshops, or day programs. And there's a number of reasons why these things happen. Low community expectations is something that we hear all too often. You know, if you're a family member, how often have you been told, oh, it's all they can manage, or they wouldn't be able to do a real job, or they're happy with their friends? That's the main thing. So many young people are put on this pathway even when they're at school, such as only having work experience in an ADE or a similar environment, because people just don't believe that maybe something bigger, better, more person-centred and more exciting will come along. There are problems, and we talk about these in the website, that traditional employment support services, such as DES, Disability Employment Services, mostly don't provide the level of support that people with intellectual disability need to find and, importantly, keep a job. I am going to talk about this a little bit more, but it's very variable. We have some DESers who really have expertise in intellectual disability, and those people with that experience find it's not too bad. But there's a whole lot of other people that don't get the support they need. It's hard to find information about open employment and to navigate the different employment systems. And that's why we have this website, because we know that navigating in particular through the disability support pension, through disability employment services, the NDIS and school, it's so hard to navigate, and there's nowhere where that information comes together. The fourth thing that people often worry about is losing the disability support pension, or even worrying about losing part of it. Because there are a lot of misunderstandings about the impact of earning a wage in open employment and the impact on your disability support pension. So closed workplaces, or a lot of Australian disability enterprises, often pay low wages at such a rate that it doesn't affect a person's pension. And often that's sold as an advantage. But that means that a lot of people believe that if they earn over that rate, they will lose much of their pension. But in fact, the DSP allows people to work for up to 29 hours a week without losing their pension. People worry that their pension is going to decline, which is true, but the pension only declines 50 cents for every dollar that you earn. So every extra dollar that you earn, you're 50 cents better off, because even though you lose some pension, you gain your salary. And there's also a threshold. You are able to earn up to $178 a fortnight before you lose any of your DSP. So all of this makes it much harder for people with intellectual disability to choose the pathway to open employment. And so, as I mentioned, the very new Everyone Can Work website was to bring together all that information you need to think about work options, to find out where the supports that you need might be available. And there are some recent important changes to supports that we'll tell you about with more information on the website. So as I mentioned, we have a guest presenter to talk to us today about her experience with open employment. I want to say a big thank you to Fiona McKenzie for being part of this Everyone Can Work webinar. Fiona is going to tell us about her open employment experience. She has worked at Coles for a number of years, and she's going to tell you what it was like for her and what are some of the things that helped her have the confidence and opportunity to work in open employment. So Fiona, thank you very much for coming, and over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. So this is my story. I am the youngest of 4 children. I grew up in a loving household. So when I was growing up, I had lots of structure. I had a pretty good routine, and I got lots of play both indoors and outdoors. So I was lucky in that respect. So in my schooling years, from kindergarten to year 10, I was in mainstream. And yes, my patience and my frustration levels were tested, but generally over my schooling period, it got a lot easier to learn how to deal with it and handle it. As I progressed through high school, sometimes it was rocky, other times it was pretty good. So the next step is my transitional years. So after my schooling. So once I left school, I had to start making my own choices, which was really, really, really hard. I had to start making life choices, learn new skills, and other things along the way. This was a long, long process, but at that stage, I didn't know I was interested in retail. But I did have a really good employment agency who helped me explore options. So I got into retail along the way. I did have a really good support network, family, my parents, my sisters, my brother, plus my extended family. And my parents were some of my big supporters. As Catherine told you, I work for Coles, and that was a journey in itself. I've been with Coles for 12 years, and in that time, I have grown in many ways. I started off in bakery, and I have to confess, I was packing hot cross buns in February. So that was a good one. Also in bakery, I was training up frozen cookies, bread rolls. I was packing bread rolls. I was doing lots of things. I also remember my first morning I put on my Coles uniform. And I felt 10 feet tall, and I felt proud that I was giving back to an industry that everyone shops at. But what made me feel proud was I have an intellectual disability, and I was working in a mainstream environment. And yes, it was scary at the start, but with the help of my bakery friends, my employment consultant, and my parents, I got through that period. So my last 4 years, I've been on the cash registers. Yes, there have been challenges, but look, challenges come my way. I take it. I have fun. But what I can actually say is, as we all know, this year's been pretty tough. But I actually worked through coronavirus. I worked through the mayhem. And this year, I was recognised as an essential worker because I was on the front line, serving customers, going a million miles an hour, and loving it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fiona. That's really terrific. And I'd invite we've got a couple of minutes if anyone would like to ask any questions in the chat, which I'll talk to Fiona about. But firstly, Fiona, can I ask you,
Sure.
what was the most important support when you were getting the job at Coles, right at the beginning?
Mm-hmm.
What was the most important thing that happened there? Can you remember? Was it your family, or was it the support from the job coach, or what happened then that was really important that helped you succeed?
So what helped me succeed was my employment agency saw something in me that I hadn't seen, and when they said, "Look, there's a retail course at Automotive certificate one in retail. Let's do it. Give it a go." I did that. I did work experience at Golo, which was a discount variety store. And I walked from my graduation straight into a job. So, quick transition.
Did you feel like you learnt about much about employment at school? Do you think going to the mainstream school helped you get ready?
Retail wasn't on the books. It was more like secretarial. So I didn't get into retail till later on in life. So
that was having the Disability Employment Service really helped you explore some other options that you didn't know you were interested in. Is that what happened?
yeah. That's how I look at it now. They were the ones who gave me a little nudge in the right direction, and here I am 12 years on, happy as can be.
And how about the income that you earn, Fiona? Do you think that makes a real difference? Does that make much of a difference to your life?
It does, because I'm earning that money. I've earned that money on my own doing what I love. So I guess when you look at it, sometimes in school you don't know what you want to do. So most people take a gap year at the end of year 12. I didn't do year 12, so I took my gap year about 13 years ago, which is where I just had to get my life into order and work out what I needed to do. And then along came Coles.
It's so fantastic to hear your story, Fiona. I feel very privileged that you've come and talked to us today, and I want to let you know that the chat's full of thanks. So there's people saying, thanks Fiona, I really appreciate hearing your story. Thank you Fiona, you made so many useful points, especially working out what you wanted to do. It was great to hear about your experience. And there's one question about the support that you got, was that whether that was under customised employment. So when we talk about customised employment, that was when the job is really made to your strengths. Do you remember whether your job was particularly sort of made Fiona sized, or did you go into a job that already existed?
That's a good question. Well, the funny thing is, when I applied for Coles, it was to be on the shop floor, putting stock on the shelves. But when I turned up on my first shift, I was told, we've changed it. You're now working in bakery. So I didn't know I was going to be working in bakery at that stage. So
did you get a lot of help from the job coach then, or was it mainly from the people at Coles?
Mainly from the people at Coles, but my employment consultant visited me for 3 months and then gradually eased off. So I built up that level of independence, not relying on my employment consultant. I just got in there and did it.
Do you get any support from the employment consultant anymore, or is that all stopped now?
That's all stopped. That stopped after 3 months of work.
Oh wow!
But they said if you need us, give us a call. So
that's great. Well, thank you, Fiona. I want to, on behalf of everyone, say thank you so much for coming along and sharing your story today. That was really, really helpful. And certainly I could...
They just said 3 months is a short period of time.
It is. Yes. Most of the things that we talk about for a lot of people with intellectual disability is a lot of people need ongoing support forever. And I've employed some people with intellectual disability where really having a regular check-in with a consultant has been very helpful. So I think you've done amazingly well to just go off and be completely independent. So well done.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the next thing just that we were going to talk about is just what is open employment, just so that we're all on the same page. So when we talk about open employment, what we mean is the employment that's open to everyone. It's people with and without disability working together in regular jobs. It's the same job market that we're all in, you know, whether you work as an employee or maybe you set up your own business to earn an income. You know, everyone has the right to work in open employment, But the NDIS data shows that only about 25% of people with intellectual disability over 25 have paid employment. And of those, 70% are employed in ADEs, often on quite a low wage. And then one of the other trends is quite a lot of people leave ADEs in their 30s and become unemployed. So that ends up being that only about 15% of people with intellectual disability work in open employment. And so it's something that's a real opportunity for people with intellectual disability now that we have the NDIS and we have more supports. We're gradually getting changes in community attitudes. And it's very clear when you talk to young people with intellectual disability that they have the same desires for their life that the rest of us have. You know, someone to love, somewhere to live, and you just heard how valuable Fiona feels, 10 foot tall when she knows that she's doing such an important job for the community during COVID. So why is open employment important? Researchers have talked to people with intellectual disability and their families about employment experiences, and a lot of this, of course, is backed up by what we know sort of anecdotally and instinctively about employment. But the researchers have found that people get much greater benefits and have a much better quality of life and improve physical and mental health when they work in open employment. Even working part-time for a few hours a week has great results for people's well-being. And this is because earning a fair wage leads to a better standard of living and less risk of poverty. We all know, I don't know how many of you know, but I have teenage sons who at one stage of their life thought they were, told me about all the things they were going to buy and where they were going to live. And it's around that stage of early teenagehood where you say to them, well, who's going to pay for that? How are you going to pay for that? Sometimes they're going to win Tats Lotto, but most of the time they figure out, oh, it's my job. It's whatever job I have that creates the income that I'm going to live, that's going to create the standard of living. And that's the same for all of us. People feel more important and valued when they learn and use skills, and it improves how other people see them. As I said, I think it's just great to hear Fiona tell us that off her own bat, how she felt, how proud she felt when she put on her Coles uniform for the first time, how proud she felt to be serving the community as a critical person during the pandemic. Working in open employment means meeting more people, making more friends, and having more social opportunities. And this can't be underestimated. Our Victorian member, Valid, has just done a project in open employment, and being part of staff meetings and being part of the chat around lunchtime are as important as any other aspect of employment, because it really does connect you to more people and help you to feel, really included in the life you're living. Working in open employment leads to greater independence. There are things like, how do you get to work? How do you get home from work? How do you do the shopping? These things all come together when you're working, and so add to independence. And the research also shows that people tend to work for longer if they work in open employment. So I just talked about how the evidence shows that a lot of people leave ADEs in their 30s. I've seen a couple of things on social media recently with people with intellectual disability who are stopping work in their 50s, having worked for 30 years, for an employer. So people tend to work for longer in open employment and have a fuller life with more purpose and meaning. So, what works? You're a family with a young person with intellectual disability. You want to know, well, what works? What are the things that the evidence shows and that other families have other families have experienced success? And the answer shows that families play a really important role in helping their children find and keep work in open employment with all of its benefits. And the research shows a few things. One of the things is, and it's one of the things that I didn't ever realise when my son was this age, was choose mainstream schooling. If you're at an early enough stage, choose mainstream education. Students are more likely to transition to open employment. And I have to tell you, that's part of my lived experience. My son started at a special school and we moved him. I was lucky enough to work in this sector, and you get all this feedback and you see all this data about how people, once they're in the segregated setting, they tend to stay there, and how it's very hard to get out from that once you're in. It's not impossible, but it's hard. It can be hard, and certainly pre-NDIS, it was pretty hard. So the move to open employment, where people are with their peers from youth, is a really, move to mainstream schooling so that people are with their peers from a young age, can have a really big impact on their ability to transition to open employment. But of course, if you're not in mainstream, it's not too late, and it's not the only factor. And so, you know, don't worry if that's not your personal circumstances, but it really is. It really does show, if young people are used to being with people without disability and sort of navigating the mainstream systems, that just seems to build up the resilience that they need to cope in a mainstream employment as well. The next thing will be no surprise, and that's have high expectation. I don't know about your experience, but mine is that you start out with really high hopes. You start out thinking that, nah, everything's going to be fine, and these are the things that we're going to do. But you can be worn down by barriers to inclusion and, you know, experts who tell us to be realistic about what might happen. But the research shows that high parental expectations lead to greater success. In fact, it's the biggest greater predictor. If you expect that your young person will have a full-time job, it's more likely to come true. So talking with your child about what they might like to be when they grow up, you know, helping them have high expectations too is really important. Start early. You know, schools begin talking about employment quite early in high school, and transition to work planning and activities such as work experience should be happening from about age 15. You know, it's one of these things, you know, my experience is it felt like that primary school was Groundhog Day, you know. It went on for many, many years. You know, you've got a few children, you stay there for many years. When you get to high school, I sort of thought it would be the same, but like everything just speeds up. And so one moment you're doing the transition, you know, you've spent all this work doing the transition to secondary school and getting everything in play and getting everything bedded down. And then suddenly you're only halfway through year 9 and they're saying, oh, let's talk about electives, and let's talk about work experience, and let's talk about, and for me, it was quite confronting. It was like, geez, that came along pretty quickly. So I would say, get early, you know, the earlier you start thinking about it, the better. So, yes, been asked the question that if mainstream schooling isn't an option, then mainstream community activities. There is a whole lot of other evidence that shows the things that build towards open employment. And so other things are, yes, absolutely, doing some other mainstream activities. One of the things, interestingly, that we found is that we're members of the local basketball community. And so even when my son was at special school, he got a gig playing mainstream basketball, which my other sons did as well. And ultimately, the opportunity for him to have a part-time job came out of the networks of basketball. He got a job at the local stadium canteen. And that was because of our local, that connection to the local community, which goes very much segue into our last point, which is be involved. And that when you're involved when you're involved at the school and you're giving a lot of feedback, when you're involved in the local community, you know about opportunities that other people might not, and you have the networks and the people to ask. And so really cannot, there's a term the researchers use, social capital. And for years I was like, I don't really know what they mean by social capital. But what it really means is that all these networks you have are valuable, that all these connections and your involvement means something. And it means that you've got then the opportunity, the capital to say to someone, I'm looking for a job for my son. Is that something I could talk to you about? And so that's the build up of the social capital. So in my world, it was when I saw this job at the canteen, I reached out to someone I knew who knew the manager at the canteen and said, do you reckon I can ask? What do I do? What are the things I need to tell her? And that person really helped give me the confidence to go and ring up and say, could I have a meeting with you, and could we have a talk about a person with intellectual disability having a job at the canteen? And just being able to overcome that barrier of the asking led to a whole range of opportunities. So, because both when you ask about community activities, both work experience, so at school or separately to school, and part-time work have both been shown to significantly increase the chances of successful open employment. And yes, a lot of it does come back to social connectedness. So now just to talk a little bit about the supports that are available these days in open employment. There are different employment support systems for people with disability in Australia. It can be really confusing. Although it's only now with the NDIS that we're able to talk to you nationally, that, you know, even that you can't just talk about things state to state, because it used to be so different state to state. But now we can say there are disability employment services. And disability employment services have been around for a long time, and it's quite likely that Fiona's support came from a disability support employment service 12 years ago. However, there are some barriers to people with intellectual disability in disability employment services, and one of them is that you have to have at least 8 hours a week. You have to be working at least 8 hours a week on average all year. So that means that if you have a job that's sometimes 4 hours a week and sometimes 5 hours a week and sometimes 9 hours a week, it has to still average out at 8 hours a week. And that can be a real barrier. On the Everyone Can Work website, we've got a case study there from a young woman who managed to get a job actually through the local Down Syndrome Association, but it was a 4-hour-a-week job. And then she needed support to get herself up to 8 hours a week, but she ended up not being able to get that support through a DES. She ended up getting that support through her NDIS plan. And that's what's made all the difference now, is DES can be helpful. There are some people, particularly people who are lucky enough to live in an area where there is a specialist DES in their area, that can be quite helpful. But for a lot of other people, DES providers haven't been able to provide enough ongoing support. So it really just depends very much on your provider. And so we'd really encourage people who are talking to DES providers to ask them questions about their experience specifically with people with intellectual disability, and whether or not they are a provider of what's known as ongoing support. That's capital O, capital S. It's a program of ongoing support. And not all DES providers do it, but often a young person with intellectual disability will need ongoing support. Then, yay, we have the NDIS. So until quite recently, most people use their NDIS plans to work in an ADE or go to a day program. So the NDIA put in the NDIS provided a different support that was called School Leaver Employment Supports. And we all call it SLES because that's its initials. And that's funding to help with a transition from school to work. But when they started SLES, it didn't kick in until halfway through in year 12. So often it really didn't kick in till quite late. And in fact, even in a couple of years ago, when my son was looking to get SLES, they wouldn't put it in his year 12 year because his plan review was in October, and they were like, oh, you'll get something new in October. And that was very frustrating. That didn't actually work as well as it could have. But particularly since July this year, the NDIA have really looked to make employment support more flexible. It can now be used to support people of legal working age, which includes students at the age when they are starting the school to work transition. So the reason that we say legal working age is in many states, a legal working age is actually 14 and 9 months. But but there are rules about employing children under 15. So we're seeing a decrease in people being employed or even be given work experience. There's a lot of places that have a policy that you've got to be 15 or over to work or get work experience. So that's just something to keep in mind. But we are only talking about a 3-month difference, so it's not a big deal. So NDIS support funding can be used very flexibly. For example, help find and support work experience and part-time jobs, develop work-ready skills, develop a CV or a portfolio, and particularly, as you heard from Fiona, work out what they are interested in or would like to do. So the support supplements school provided transition to work activities and supports parents to be involved. So one of the things, which I won't go into a lot of detail now, but I know maybe questions, is it's the interface of school. What's the school, the education system responsible for, and where are you allowed to use your NDIS plan? And it's one of the things that we talk about in the website, because of course you're not supposed to use your NDIS plan for something that's provided by another system. But there are a lot of ways you can flexibly use your NDIS plan supporting around the person to help them succeed on the pathway to open employment. One of the things that's critical is that you need an employment related goal in your NDIS plan. So if you're in contact with an LAC or a planner and you want to discuss employment, you really need to put an employment-based goal in there, even from young. So even if you put one in at age 14 or 15, I want to learn about employment. I want to try and get a part-time job. I want to build my skills before employment. I want to learn what I'm good at so I'll be able to be employed. There's a range of things you could put in the plan that need to be true for you or for your young person, of course, but it needs to particularly point to employment. So it's harder to get, or you can't get employment supports in your plan if you don't have an employment goal in your plan. So just really want to give that tip for when you're talking to your local area coordinator or your planner. One of the things that we wanted to include today was to just mention the things that you can do now. You know, sometimes, as I said, it can feel like employment's still a fair way away. But there are things that you can do now that you don't need to wait until your child is older. You know, things that you can do to give them the best start that they possibly can have. So what might they be? Hold similar expectations for your young person with disability as you do for your other children, and don't let people talk you out of it. It's okay to hold on to your goals. Encourage play that includes them as workers. So, you know, make sure if they're playing doctors and nurses that they're not always the patient, that sometimes they're the doctor. If they're playing shops, that they're the storekeeper and not just the customer. Talk positively with your young person about working. If you're always moaning and groaning about your own job, they might get the idea that work's a bad thing. So saying to them, letting them know how work's a really great thing and how you meet new people at work, or you earn an income at work, or the things that can let them know that work is a really good thing. Making the link between having a job and earning an income. I know that my son used to say, I'm going to marry my girlfriend and I'm going to go and have a lovely house, a lovely car, and I'm going to do all these things. And it was funny because even though I work in the sector, I realised that he got to about age 13 with this whole story, and I'd never actually said, how are you going to pay for those things? So one day I said to him, how are you going to pay for those things? And he looked at me and he was like, the bank? And I said, yeah. How's the money going to get into the bank? And he was like, I don't know. I said, it's your job. It's your job. Your boss pays the money into the bank, and then you can take the money out of the bank, and then you'll have money to spend. And he was like, oh, okay. So we had a couple of discussions, and then suddenly the story of his life was, I'm going to leave school, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to get married. I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to get married. So it was so interesting to me that on the one hand, it was such a big gap that I inadvertently left out of the story of the life, was getting a job, but also how easy it was to bring into the narrative as well. You can talk about jobs you see people doing when you're out and about. You know that a lot of kids, they're going to be a bus driver or a teacher or a fireman because they're the jobs they can see. But sometimes saying to them, oh no, the person at the supermarket, that's a job. Or, I'm trying to think of some sort of service. Maybe you've had people come round and catered for a party or something, like that's a job. So things that might not be so obvious to young children, you can explain to them. They're jobs that people get paid to do. And then to encourage their interests and get to know what they are good at, what they enjoy and what they're good at. Encourage fitness and hygiene. And encourage social norms. So make sure it's one of the really bad things that happen for people coming out of institutions in particular is often they haven't been supported to understand social norms in terms of behaviour. You know, how much you touch other people, how much you don't touch other people, what polite conversation is like, how to take turns in conversation. These things are really important to establish young. Concepts of privacy. There are a whole lot of concepts that you can do young that actually flow into success to open employment later on. Hold them accountable to family expectations about housework and chores. Make sure all the kids have to do chores. If that's what you're doing for the rest of the, if that's what their siblings are doing. They don't get a leave pass just because they've got a disability. It's important that they do the same things and contribute to have the same, feel themselves to be a valuable contributor to the family. Teach them resilience by giving them opportunities to experience and overcome failure. We know as parents, we're so desperate for our young people with intellectual disability to do well that sometimes we cannot let them fail. We cannot let them experience consequences of their behaviour or the way they interact with other people. And sometimes it's important for them to experience this as well. And the other thing is to ask other family, friends and peer networks for support. I know for myself, being involved in peer support networks has been the most amazing experience and a source of great resilience and confidence for me. And in fact, the success that my son had in having a part-time job that I just talked about with the basketball club was, or in the basketball stadium, was I'd been to a Circles of Support workshop like this, but face-to-face. And one of the things they did was they had people talk who'd been asked for help, and they said how pleased they were when a family asked them for help. And that gave me the courage to ask for help. And I did it 2 or 3 times during my son's teenage years, and I got knocked back a couple of times, but I'm so glad that I learned to do it, because I don't think he would have had the opportunity for work if I hadn't had the courage to ask. And so, you know, I would really just say get as much support as you can get. Now, this is the moment, the last part of the webinar will be about the website itself, and so talking about how we navigate the website and how you find some of this information on the Everyone Can Work website. But we do have about 5 minutes now if people would like to ask any questions, either in the chat or to turn your microphone and video on and just ask me face to face. Any questions?
Hi, Fiona. A quick question, Fiona. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Hi, Fiona. It's Dee Brown. I can't seem to start my video. Apologies.
Are you wanting to ask me the question? I'm Catherine, or did you want to ask Fiona from earlier?
Oh, no, sorry, Catherine. Apologies.
That's all right. I'm just checking.
Got the wrong name up on my screen. Apologies, Catherine. Hoping my video is working sometime.
Yes, it is. It is. I can see you.
Hi. I'm just wondering, are there any strategies around how to start having conversations with schools about the importance of talking about employment at a younger age with our kids? It doesn't seem to be a priority, and I'm not quite sure how to table it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think the most effective strategy that I've come across is showing them evidence, is to say to them, here's some evidence that this works. Now, I just have to give you a very small confession about our website. We have a whole lot of evidence pieces which are going to link to the information we have on, but we did have a technical glitch and we probably won't have them up till the end of the month. So I just really wanted to say, please keep an eye on the website because it is about to be upgraded to have more evidence. But the experience that I'm about to tell you was a secondary school experience, not a primary school experience. But I took an article, my son has Down syndrome, and so there's a national magazine journal that goes out, and it had some articles about overemployment that had some evidence in it, and I scanned those articles and sent them to the school as evidence and said, this is why I want to talk about work experience. And we were very lucky. It's one of these things with career counsellors, whether people, you know, there's a big variability in terms of the support that people get from career counsellors. And if you're lucky, you get a career counsellor like we got that said, oh, this is something different, and actually went and did a little bit of professional development and came back and said to us, oh, we've learned that one of the things that can be really helpful for people with intellectual disability is to have a portfolio, which is a bit different to a CV. So the portfolio might have photos of them working, or things that they're good at, or reports from work experience, or any of those other things that you can put together. And he helped us do that. So we didn't
being able to use SLES funding alongside, so e.g. can a school employ someone with SLES funding to implement those programs if there is, say, a small class there or a group of students that are needing it? Have you heard of anything like that happening previously?
No. So schools, I'll just explain the division. So schools may not use SLES funding. So schools have their own funding, and they need to provide the resources, and they need to be inclusive, and they need to make sure that all students, including students with intellectual disability, get the same supports and opportunities as anyone else. For example, the year 10 work experience that everyone has to do. However, your son or daughter gets the SLES fund, can get the SLES funding, and you can employ that way. So it won't happen through the school, but it can happen in partnership with the school. So for example, in my son's case, he had this job at the canteen. And so one of the things he had to do was give change. So we did two things. We both talked to the school about he has this job now. And so in his maths, the giving of change is a big deal. Can we work on that? And we also, with his SLES funding, or it wasn't SLES funding we had then, but anyway, with his NDIS plan, we actually had a 2-hour session with a independent support worker, but she came from a teaching background, and she worked very hard, very specifically around the canteen. So we took photos of the things, you know, the canteen sells 4 hot foods: chips, chicken chips, dim sims, and potato cakes, and they all priced at dollars or $1.50. So we did a lot of practice, you know, if people want 2 dim sims and they have got $5, how much change will you give, you know? So we were able to do that very specifically. So we used the NDIS funding to supplement it at home and the school. But the other thing we did, say in year 10 with the work experience, is that it's up to the school to organise the work experience and to support the person at work experience. But 16-year-olds in general can get themselves to and from work experience by public transport. Young person with intellectual disability going in a strange direction just for a week, you know, 1 week, needs other support. So we used our NDIS funding for a person to travel with him on public transport to get to and from the work experience. So that's the way your NDIS plan and your school stuff can work together, but the school never gets the funding. You still have to do the navigation of organising the funding yourself, and then the school, and keeping the school accountable and not letting the school dump it back on you. Oh, good, you've got that funding. Well, then you're right now. It's like, no. You still have responsibilities and you still have to do that. But you can, this is the thing about establishing, this is what you can do in year 7 and 8, like get to know them really well. So by the time you want to talk about it in year 9, you might be ready.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So talking about our website. So we're very proud of our new Everyone Can Work website. So we're just going to give you a very quick sort of look at it to help you navigate it. So who is it for? It's for people with intellectual disability and their families. And we've tried to make it really inclusive of different ages and stages, whether you're just starting out with thinking about employment, whether you're preparing to transition from school, whether you're a school leaver, or whether you're an older person with intellectual disability that never had the opportunity to work and you'd like to have a go now. Thank you very much. Well, we think you should have that opportunity as well. So what kind of information is on it? We've got practical information at each stage. We've got some research, we've got some evidence. As I said, keep your eye out. By the end of the month, we'll have even more evidence up there. There's some people's real life open employment stories. So we have a mixture of some written case studies and some videos and some examples. And also easy to understand. We have it in plain language. We've worked really hard to make it an easy to navigate, you know, no wrong door approach, and to make sure that there's easy read information for young people with intellectual disability some people may be able to navigate the website on their own, but certainly as families, when we're talking about how important open employment is, there is also an easy read document that you could go through, print off and go through with your young person to talk about work. And also the website has been designed so you can revisit it at different stages of your life or at different times to find the information that you need when you need it. So one of the things you can do on the website, Eben, can we have the next slide? Is to use the My Employment Pathway wizard. And that is, as you can see here, what happens is you click on the start here on the front page of the website, and then it asks you some questions. So, you know, are you a person with disability? You might say no. Are you a family member? Yes. What is the age of the young person? And then at the end, it'll tell you about a whole lot of resources that are on the website that might be relevant to you. So it sort of helps curate the information to make it easy for you to navigate. But if that doesn't really work for you, or you like to, you know, browse yourself, then you can use the website search function, or there are boxes on the front page with the different topics that you can try. And so I think I just said that backwards. I should have probably gone. Evan, can you go back to the first slide? I started on the My Employment Pathway, and I should have just noted that there are other tabs you can see on the front page there. There's thinking about work, employment support, real life stories and resources. So you can just navigate doing it that way as well. Can we move to the final slide, please, Evan? Oh, sorry. Yes. Sorry, that one. Second last slide. So the other thing we have is the A to Z of open employment. So a lot of terms that are used in the sector or in the space are talked in the A to Z. So it's really sort of like a glossary or a word list. In the website itself, when these words are used, you have the option to click through, or you can just look at the A to Z yourself and look at what a whole lot of different terms mean in terms of some of the terms that are used in the NDIS or in Disability Employment Services, and all the myriad of acronyms we all need to get our head around are dealt with there. So that's an hour already. I don't know whether that was slow or fast for you. I'll be very keen to get your feedback, please, to tell us what was helpful and what was not, or what you would have liked us to spend more time on and what didn't need as much time. Katie has just very instantly put the post-webinar survey into the chat. We'd be very grateful if you had the time to fill this out. We've tried to make it as simple as we can. And as any of you who have dealt with government funding know, one of the ways that we find out whether webinars like this and a website like this are genuinely helpful is if you tell us, and if you tell us that they're helpful and we're able to show that to government, we can get more funding to do more of it in the future. So your honest opinion would be greatly appreciated. It's a SurveyMonkey, so it's just an online survey, so you can just input your answers as quickly as you like and click submit. And as I said, we'd be very grateful if you were able to do that. One of the things we do have to confess to you is that we're actually quite a small organisation, and we don't have the resources to respond to individual questions. So we're not able to provide individualised support. That's something that you'd actually need to get through your NDIS plan. And it's the reason that we've developed the website. So at least there's a place where all the information comes together. We understand that's just the first step, and encourage you to be part of your disability specific peer support networks or broader peer support networks, or advocacy and self-advocacy organisations encourage you that those mechanisms are all ways to find out about good providers and good tips, as well as getting our information online. Online is how to get in touch with us. There's a phone number, our Twitter handle and website and admin address. So please don't hesitate to be in contact, particularly with feedback about the website and ways that we could improve. Thank you very much for giving up your probably your lunch hour, and we wish you just every success in your journey, and hope that open employment, the pride and the satisfaction that you heard from Fiona today is something that's in your future as well. Thank you so much for your time.